Welcome to Anabolic Analysis, the show where we bring clarity to training, nutrition, and physique development by speaking with coaches, researchers, and bodybuilders about how they interpret the evidence and apply it in the real world. Less guessing, more growing. Today, I'm joined by Jackson, aka Scientifically Jacked. For anyone who may not know, who are you? What do you do? And what areas of training or nutrition are you most interested in?
Yeah. So my name's Jackson. I am an online coach. I also do social media, obviously, on the side. And areas that I find myself more involved in, particularly with social media, tends to be surrounding usually misinformation around training principles, whether that be related to physiology or biomechanics or just human anatomy. And then also with like my coaching specifically, I would say most of the areas that I spend the most time with is probably nutrition, I would say with them because with the training stuff, it generally is pretty simple once you explain it. It's not something you have to continue to explain over and over and over. Nutrition tends to be the thing that changes all the time. So that's kind of where I would focus more with my clients.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Just in my own coaching experience and just in the areas of research is training, as Dorian says, hypertrophy is stupidly forgiving. You can do a lot of dumb shit in the gym and still grow, but nutrition is definitely a lot more of a nuanced topic.
Yeah, for sure.
What does your current training look like? What split are you running and why?
So I recently switched up my training, but I am doing full body at the moment. And I'm still not fully decided on if I'm going to do it 3 times a week or every other day. Mainly the big reason for the switch is just for a schedule change. But I really have been trying to focus more so on improving like my arms and my limbs specifically. So my legs and my arms. But I was previously doing upper lower 6 times a week. But yeah, I had to change for the scheduling purposes of being more of an online coach, right? It's just the more you get clients, the harder it is to run something like upper lower. But yeah, so I've been running I've just started, but I'm planning on running 3 times frequency, if not 3.5 times frequency.
What's the deciding factor between if you go 3 times a week or full body every other day? Are you just mainly schedule or anything physiological?
Yeah, so it can be a mix of both. Problem with like frequency is like we know everything's going to have diminishing returns. Even with the arguments about 2 and 3, we can already argue about diminishing returns there as well. But it's also mostly a schedule thing, right? Like I'm a theoretical person like at nature, so I want to try things. I want to see if I can get benefit. It doesn't necessarily mean that I think it is going to benefit me always, but I want to try it at least because things in theory, sometimes do pan out. And I will say with upper lower, when I was running that 6 times a week, training 3 times frequency, I did notice some movements did seem to just get stronger than when I was doing it like 2 to 2.5 times frequency. So I think with full body, if I can do 3.5 times frequency, I can probably improve a lot more strength in terms of like neural adaptations, getting more practice with things. But I'm not sure how much that's going to translate to more hypertrophy. But it's getting stronger, which is what I care about a lot. So I see it as a benefit no matter what. Even if I don't build more like significant muscle, I'm still getting stronger faster.
Yeah, 100%. And I did want to loop back to one thing that you said about you noticed certain muscle groups were growing better with when you were doing 2 versus 3 times frequency. That's one thing that I think is often overlooked is that sometimes certain muscle groups respond better to different frequencies. It's not just a one size fits all.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. And I think this was actually a conversation that used to happen a while ago, but it doesn't get talked about much anymore. Is the fact that different muscles are going to have composition typing that are not going to be like equivalent to each other. So, like, there's certain muscles that are predominantly going to be type 2 muscle fibers. There's also muscles that are going to be kind of split between type 2, type 1. And the thing about type 2 muscle fibers is they tend to be, and even with like the protective effects that occur with the repeated bout effect, we still tend to see those muscle fibers experiencing more fatigue because they rely more on systems that create more byproducts that lead to more discomfort, more muscle damage, more afferent feedback signaling. So, like these things that occur with our training with those muscle fibers that are super high threshold, like type 2 fibers, those are the fibers that are most prone to fatigue. They are much more glycolytic by nature, right? So they
Yes.
tend to run through glycogen a lot faster. So I do think certain muscles just sometimes maybe are not going to recover as well with 3 times frequency. Doesn't mean that I think you can't do it, but I definitely think there are diminishing returns for certain muscles for sure.
I would 100% agree. The one that I always have struggled with and that I've noticed in my clients is chest. I think
Mm,
chest is one of the ones that I've always seen better results in myself and my clients with doing it either lower volume or lower frequency or both. The three most important variables with training, in my opinion, are obviously frequency, volume, and intensity, with I think in frequency and intensity being one and two, and then volume just kind of in third place. Especially after, I don't know if you saw a new preprint came out where they increased people's already existing volume by either 20% or 120%, and nothing changed. Like they
Mhm.
didn't see a difference between the groups. So literally over doubling. That's why whenever people say, "Oh, I think I just need more sets," and now we have evidence of trained lifters literally doubling the amount of sets they're doing and it not doing anything for strength or hypertrophy.
Yeah, and that's not
And
even a new concept either. Like, that's actually ironically something I saw this was a while ago when I was looking through, like, just research. I was just browsing, and I found 2 different papers looking at single set programs versus, like, I think they were doing 3 sets, and it was looking at 3 times frequency, which is full body, right? And they found with both of these papers no difference in strength outcomes. And one paper was only 8 weeks, so keep that in mind, but the other one was 12. So, like, that's 12 weeks is long enough to see something. If you don't see any strength differences, I mean, that's pretty significant. So, I would heavily agree. I think volume, usually the answer with like, am I not seeing progress? Usually the answer with high frequency is not to add more volume. Like, that makes no sense. It's just the first set, despite what people want to say about Chris Beardsley, is I will say that's the one thing that I think he like hammered home really well is that the first set is going to be the most stimulating. So, and that's something you should take into consideration when you are deciding your volume for sure.
I saw something recently from TNF, and it was like, once you understand that one set is infinitely better than zero sets, it kind of completely changes the way you approach the gym.
This is why it's a topic that I think it's hard for people to understand, but like it's a topic that I really am passionate about because people will complain sometimes about like not having time to train. It's like you literally could go to the gym 2 days a week, one set for a single muscle, and you do that twice a week, you're going to be more in shape, more jacked than the average person, right? If you actually train hard, you have to train hard to actually do that, but still, like, if trained lifters can experience significant gains, beginners are going to experience even more gains because their growth potential is so much higher. So, yeah, I think that's why I really
Yeah.
I think the frequency and the first set being the most stimulating. I think those are two topics that are extremely vital to understand if you are trying to maximize growth or if you are trying to like make do with whatever your situation is. Like you said, if you one set is infinitely better than zero, like applying that concept in a way where it's like, okay, I can't train, 3, 4 days out of this week, but I can train twice. I can still grow. So like I think it gives you that perspective. So I definitely agree.
Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head with just saying that people really do overestimate the amount of time that's needed to grow and the amount of effort even as well, because that the study that everyone loves to reference, they weren't even training to failure. The one set twice a week, they were going to 2 reps in reserve. And
Yep.
that shows you really how easy it is to grow. One thing that people sort of get confused by is on one side, you have everyone saying, oh, well, hypertrophy is a very slow process and you don't put on that much muscle. But then on the other hand, they're saying, but you only need to go in 2 times a week to do it. And so, how do you kind of bridge that gap?
Yeah, and the thing is, like, I think if you are a natural athlete, you have to accept that muscle growth is a process that on a week to week schedule, it is a slow process, right? No matter, even if you are a beginner, like, even let's say you can put on 12 pounds of muscle in a year, right? That's still a pound a month. That's really, really small. That's 448 grams of contractile proteins plus the glycogen water in terms of weight, right? You divide that by four, right? You're maybe putting on 100 ish grams of contractile proteins a week. Now, imagine an advanced athlete, 2 pounds, right? 2 pounds a year. That's even significantly less. So I'm not going to even do the math off my head. But point is, like, it is something you have to, right? But, right, at the same time, like, I think it's a nuanced thing because as you said, right, we don't see significant differences with adding more volume to our strength or our hypertrophy. So even though I know it feels like doing too little is just going to lead to even slower gains, it's really like you said, hypertrophy is stupidly forgiving, right? So there's a lot of people who have trained with even less frequency, even less intensity, and still put on a lot of muscle. So it's I know it's kind of scary, right? It feels like, oh no, I'm not going to make gains. But the truth is, a lot of that like fear comes from comparing yourself to others and other people's progress. And that's where you have to kind of be careful because it's like there's people out there who are blasting roids and they'll
Yeah.
train like idiots. And you'll come up and be like, oh, why am I not looking like that? And that's really where that kind of like concern stems from. But most people, like if they just give it some time, they will see progress. Most of them aren't lean enough, and that's another factor. They're just like, I don't look good, and I'm not looking better by training. So like,
Yeah.
I think there's multiple factors that do play into that fear. But yeah, as you said, and as many others have said, hypertrophy is very forgiving. So yeah, that's my perspective at least.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. And especially with the gear usage. I mean, The Rock claimed Natty for like 30 years. I don't know if he's publicly ever come out and said that he is not natural.
I don't think he
But
has. I don't think he has.
it's so obvious now because he hopped off and he turned from the rock to the pebble and everyone was like, "Oh my god, what happened?" But then everyone else who actually knows anything about the gym and about gear usage was like, "Yeah, that's what happens."
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
look at Ronnie Coleman now. Like, he's not 300 pounds, 5% body fat anymore. Of course not.
And they'll never
He's not
accept it.
running enough gear to kill a rhino.
They'll never accept it. That's the biggest problem is, and like we've seen this very recently on social media where people are talking about like C-Bum and his curling variation versus some other kid. And obviously,
Mhm.
yes, C-Bum is like controlling the top position, but it's still elbow flexion, right? Your biceps are
Yeah.
brachioradialis, brachialis. They're still pulling the insertion to the origin, right? Like that's still a thing that's occurring. You're not like there's not like a magical thing occurring that's forcing your elbow to flex aside from those elbow flexors. It's not like he's swinging the weight in the video. So he is training those muscles, but people are still finding all the excuses in the world to say that C-Bum is doing something so much more special. And it's just because he looks good. So, anyways, I think
Yeah.
that's it's something that people need to accept, but it's going to be a hard, long road of getting people to understand that it's the gear. It's unfortunately gear and genetics is why they
Yeah.
look. You.
Are you 100% sure it's not because he is drinking more water than you?
You know, muscle is 70% water, so maybe I just need to start drinking so much more water. So I need to be tripling my water intake. Put my kidneys on the freaking God. My kidneys are gonna be so cooked. But no, like, yeah, it's God. I don't even know how you can like logically come to that conclusion. And also as a person who is on gear, because I know Rumvis is the one who said it. I'm not trying to be like calling him out exactly by name.
Yeah.
But like as somebody who hopped on and you're seeing your progress, how do you not understand that this is from gear? You were natural for 3 years and you made not even half the progress made enhanced. Like that should be an eye opener, but I don't know. It's he maybe he has a different perspective. I haven't heard his full on thoughts off the camera, but I think it's pretty ridiculous. It is gear and genetics.
Yeah. It's honestly a shame that we don't have more data on gear because everyone always quotes the study where you had the natural lifters, the enhanced lifters, and the enhanced couch potatoes. And the enhanced couch potatoes grew more muscle than the natural lifters. And then there's obviously everyone brings up the problems with that study. They're like, oh, well, you can't just use that to say, like, that's your one study. It's not your silver bullet that says that gear grows muscle without training. But
Yeah.
it's not. We don't need a silver bullet because we also have, and then you'll say, well, we have a bunch of rodent studies as well where they gave them gear and they grew without resistance training.
Yeah, I've actually spoken with a few people on this, including my girlfriend who is going for her master's. And probably the most likely scenario, obviously, again, not trying to be ultra dogmatic because we don't have a lot of data on this yet. But what they are proposing is that gear essentially stimulates increased satellite cell proliferation, meaning we're going to have more nuclei within our existing muscle cells because they're multinucleated and
Uh-huh.
increasing the amount of nuclei inside muscle cells increases the rate of contractile protein synthesis. So you're having more increases in terms of synthesis rates, and we're going to see larger expansion of our existing muscle fiber. So it's not necessarily, like, some people thought it was hyperplasia, but there's no, like, that is one thing. I don't think there is any evidence for hyperplasia, which I even at one point thought that, but it does seem to be like because they're like, what else would it be, right? If it's not hyperplasia, it has to be more
Yeah.
hypertrophy, but it's not coming from mechanical tension, so it
Mhm.
has to be something else. And the only
Exactly.
thing that really it could be is satellite cells. So that's I'm not going to take credit for that because I did not figure that out on my own, but that is definitely something that a lot of, I would say, physiologists are at least looking at the moment. But again, research is kind of limited. We only have some minimal animal
Mhm.
data. So, but yeah, I would definitely agree. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, we shouldn't rely on one paper or even just mechanistic evidence, but we can also just use our eyeballs, right? Like these people are 300 pounds lean.
Yeah.
Who is
Yeah.
300 pounds lean without gear?
Yeah.
Show me one person. It's definitely
Mhm.
definitely the gear and genetics.
So it was like,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
simply
no,
like,
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't
And
care
even if
how well
so, yeah,
recovered you are.
I was like, even if those numbers aren't fully accurate, right? Let's say we have limitations in the research, which we do. We have pretty big limitations with outcome
Yeah.
data. We have indirect measurements. We have conflation of direct versus indirect. So, like, if like some of the researchers aren't accounting for that, or they aren't really addressing that
Mhm.
limitation, that could be an issue with tracking that rate of like growth. But at the same time, even if those numbers aren't fully accurate, it still is representative of what we know. Muscle growth slows down, right? The newbie gain phase is a real thing, and it's because you have so much growth potential. But after a certain point, like
Mhm.
when you're not enhanced, there is only so much satellite cell proliferation increasing the amount of nuclei that we have, right? There is a natural cap. There is a limiter. I can't remember the exact mechanism that stops it, but there is a limiter to how much our satellite cells will contribute to increasing nuclei content within our muscle cells. So there's only one explanation, right? If you go from 180 to 300, you didn't do it. You didn't do it natural. And even if you went from 180 to 250,
Mhm.
that's still also kind of sus because that's significantly a lot more muscle than anyone else would be able to put on. So you can look at people's transformations and
Yeah.
generally gauge if you actually can assess their body fat and their actual like rate of gain. Because some people maybe they jump up 40 pounds, but they're 3 or 4% body fat higher than before, right? Because then it's like 30 pounds, and maybe they did that over
Mhm.
like 6 to 8, maybe 9 years. That's realistic, right? But 30 pounds, 2 years, maybe not. But again, it's hard to say. Some people have more, potential than others. Unfortunately, it's just how the world works.
When you're building a program, let's say we're starting this from the ground up. You got a new client in and they're a beginner, right? So we're not trying to bring up any specific muscle points. We just want to get this guy jacked. He comes to you, he says, Jackson, I want to be big. Make me big. How do you make this program?
Well, first of all, I like to assess like what their schedule is, right? Because if they can handle higher frequency training, great. If they can't, I mean, like if they don't like, let's say they don't want to go to the gym 3 times a week only, and I'd have to like fight them to do it, to do full body. I'm not going to fight that, right? I'm not going to force them to do a split they're not going to like, but I am going to advocate for training a muscle 2 to 3 times a week. And I think for beginners, I think higher frequency gives you better practice at doing movements. So it is more advantageous for pure newbies. But, a lot of times they don't want to train full body. It's, maybe too long of a workout or whatever. So usually my go tos are going to be a structure where we either do like upper, lower, or some kind of like anterior, posterior, torso, limb, but we split the body in half, right? But the biggest thing that I like to do is also encourage training the major joint actions, right? I think that if you're missing out on specific joint actions, when I say major, I'm not going to talk about like ulnar deviation, right? Or some crazy like obscure random movement, but generally speaking, elbow flexion, elbow extension, horizontal adduction, abduction, and then we have like for layman's term, like vertical press, vertical pull, right? Stuff like that, like training those major actions, and the program should include them. So typically, yeah, I'll kind of assess their structure. We'll take a look at like what is already maybe developed or what is already genetically kind of like favoring them. Like they have really good structure. Maybe we don't need to overemphasize, like let's say their chest is already looking amazing. Maybe we don't need to prioritize it as much. But let's say they have a wider waist and they're trying to look wider. Then we're going to prioritize muscles that actually will increase the width. We can't fix their waist, but we can make their shoulders bigger. We can make their lats bigger, things like that. So, but yeah, I would say biggest things is advocating for higher frequency, educating them on the joint actions that we're going to do. And then on top of that, really encouraging training with intensity, with heavier loads. Obviously, when we first start out, get used to training with like just intensity, and then we can focus on getting stronger. Because yeah, if you just throw on a bunch of weight to a newbie, you're like, hey, just do a 5 rep max real quick. They're not going to
Yeah.
do it very well. So, that's kind of like how I start things. And then as things evolve, we just kind of evolve with them, right? If they're developing really, really well and, they're getting better at using heavier loads, we're not going to change anything. But if they let's say they're not developing things, or maybe their back isn't growing, or something's not working after like a year of training, then, maybe we need to play with the frequency or other variables that we haven't touched on enough. But yeah, there's a lot of ways to go about it, but I do like to start with that general structure first and then kind of go from there.
One thing that people are going to definitely want to know about is, let's say you mentioned major joint actions. What about isolations? The big ones are always traps and rear delts. Do
Mm.
I need to train rear delts directly? Do I need to train my traps directly? Or can I just do a row and am I good there?
There's two schools of thoughts to this, right? My school of thought is you need to be efficient with your programming to start, because when you're first starting, you probably don't like the gym, right? Like you don't even want to be there. So you need to be efficient with it to make it start to become enjoyable. And then also the other thing is, though a row will train your rear delts and traps really well. That doesn't mean that it
Yes.
necessarily maximizes, but at the same time, how far off is it from maximizing? That's the conversation that gets lost. It's like, yes, maybe it doesn't maximize, but let's say it's like 1% off. If your rear delts are massive, if your traps are massive after doing a row, are you going to care? Right? Yes, then
No.
great. Do it. I say if you do it. If you don't, right? It's like it's a
Yeah.
choice. And I think people need to remember you have the ability to take a step back after, doing a program and asking yourself the question, do I want to do this? Do I actually care? If you don't care about maximizing the growth of your traps, you don't need to do a Kelso shrug. But if you do, then maybe you do at some point. But I think for beginners, you need to start with some like mostly compounds. Doing a few isolations, I think biceps,
Yeah.
triceps, you kind of have to. Uh,
Yeah.
but rear delts, they're gonna get trained. Sagittal pull, they're gonna get trained. Row, I mean, I don't say not really much here. But like realistically, the rear delts are gonna get hit there. The traps are gonna get hit through here. One thing that you could potentially argue for, though, I don't know how significant it would really make an impact on, is elevation. People don't really do
Yeah.
that very often. Like a lateral raise, the only elevation that really occurs is through scapulohumeral rhythm, but it's not really the main joint action. So I would argue maybe consider that. It's like, but what is it really gonna do, like visually for you?
Yeah. And
So I
honestly, I
don't
think what it will do visually is something that a lot of people don't necessarily want. I
know.
don't think a lot of people want to have those just the massive traps. Like I'm sure you've seen the memes of how Ronnie Coleman looks like he's a smaller guy inside of a big muscle suit.
Yeah, yeah, and also I
Yeah.
was gonna say, like, a lot of the shrugging movement, like, that muscle does technically get an isometric in, like a hinge, like an RDL or SLDL, so and hinges like, isometrics do work, and it is a really hard isometric, but again, is it gonna maximize that growth? Probably not, but at the same time, like you said, like, do I really care about developing those muscle like, that region of my trap? If not,
Yeah.
then don't waste your time, right?
I think one thing that gets often forgotten is training the things that you want to train, the individuality of training. People will always ask me, do I need to train rear delts? Do I need to directly train traps? Do I need the shrug? And my answer is normally, I don't know. Do you? Because some people, for instance, myself with my traps and my rear delts specifically, both of them, like I get asked all the time, like, oh, what do you do for your rear delts? What do you do for your traps? I haven't done a rear delt isolation in probably 2 years. My rear delts grow amazingly from just doing all my pull downs and my rows. But I have clients that I will program isolations for because theirs just simply don't. And that's one thing is the individuality is you'll notice that you have those strong muscle groups that just seem to grow like a weed without you really having to do much. And then you also have ones that you'll prioritize. Like I've put triceps at the beginning of my workouts for the last 3 years, and they're still one of my weakest body parts. And that's just how it is for some people. You're going to notice that certain muscle groups are going to grow very well, and other ones you're going to have to prioritize the hell out of them, and they still are not going to grow as well.
Yeah, yeah, and I definitely agree. I think the other thing people need to consider is muscle bellies are gonna look very different between people. So, like your triceps, for example, they might be growing quite well, but when you're looking at your triceps or other people looking at your triceps, the visualization of that like muscle growth is not what they want to see, right? Like it's not bubbly. Like I think a great example, not to glaze this guy too much, but I think a great example of like a really bubbly like tricep that people want to have is someone like Clark Kent.
Yeah.
Like he has really, really solid muscle bellies. And it doesn't mean he's necessarily like his arms are huge, but it doesn't mean he's necessarily like the strongest person of all time because like compare him to somebody else with maybe not the best muscle bellies. I think Lex Little's a great example. His triceps aren't that like they don't look as big as Clark's. He does have stronger triceps. If you've
Yeah.
seen a lot of his pressing, like with his tricep like dominant pressing, he is very strong. But like you said, it's like you've been prioritizing them for how long, right? You said they like the last 2 years, but they don't look like Clark Kent's for a reason, right? It's muscle bellies. So yeah, a lot of individuality comes into it, and I think you know you got to consider that, especially if you're talking about like prioritizing things as an individual. Because yeah, maybe a Kelso shrug is needed to maximize growth, but why would you want to do that if it's already massively overdeveloped, right? Like you don't. Not everyone needs to maximize the growth of every single muscle, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and especially because 99% of people are not ever planning on stepping on stage anyways. So why just grow the things that you want to grow? You don't need to maximize everything. And honestly, you probably don't even want to. And that's also the difference between when making a program for yourself and just copying a program from someone else, especially once you have learned a little bit more about bodybuilding and you realize you should never copy a bodybuilder's split because their split is specifically designed to give them a look. First of all, they've been training for like 5 years. So they know exactly what their strong and their weak points are. And their split is designed specifically not only to bring those up, but also to maintain symmetry, to keep them under a weight cap. There's a lot of other variables that go into it because most people aren't looking at open bodybuilders. Most
Yeah.
people aren't assuming, they're not looking at people who are just trying to get everything as massive as possible. They're looking at Sebum. They're looking at Ramon. They're looking at Terrence Ruffin. And they're looking at these people who, like Terrence Ruffin, trains legs almost like he almost doesn't because his legs are so dominant and he needs to stay under his weight cap and he needs to bring up other parts of his body to maintain that symmetry. So his leg split, his leg day is probably not good for you because he's not even really focused on growing his legs anymore. He just wants to keep what he has.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I was gonna say, like, that's just there's just so many nuances to like, especially bodybuilding, right? That I don't think the average gym goer really thinks about because as much as people want to be bodybuilders, they're not, right? A lot of these people are never gonna touch a stage in their life. And they'll act like they will, but they never will. And that's the thing. Like there are people, and I'm not trying to put people off from doing it, but a lot of people in their head are saying, I am a bodybuilder, and they have zero intention to actually do it. So that's another thing is like you have to consider bodybuilders are doing things for reasons. And yes, some of them are training not the most intelligently because there's still a lot of misinformation around training. So that's another factor to consider. Like you'll see a bodybuilder doing something just because they did it doesn't mean it will work. Like Rich Piana, who's doing an 8-hour arm workout? Right? Nobody is going to be doing that. You're going to get rhabdo after. If you don't know what rhabdo is, that's like excessive muscle breakdown from just like excessive muscle damage. But yeah, like I don't know. There's a lot of factors to consider, but I think for most times, I just don't think copying somebody's workout is smart. Like I think it's better to educate yourself on what muscles do, what joint actions look like, and then asking yourself, what do I care about? What do I want to bring up? And then focusing on that.
Exactly. No, I 100% agree. And for going farther into this, so we're building this program for this hypothetical beginner. First, we've decided what their frequency is going to be, and we're going to be training those major joint actions. How do I choose which exercises I'm using to train these joint actions? Because, the ones you mentioned, I've got horizontal adduction. Do I do a fly? Do I do a press? How do I know if I'm going to do a fly or press?
Mhm.
And how do I know not only, okay, so maybe I have decided I am going to do a press. What press do I do? And what machine do I do? Maybe I have 3 different flat press machines at my gym. How do I know which one's the best?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it comes down to a few factors, right? Like, because again, if we go back to the conversation of do I need an isolation for everything? And obviously the answer is no. I would ask yourself this, right? So if we're looking at certain muscle groups, like let's say the chest, you brought up horizontal adduction. You're asking, should I do a fly or a press? I would ask you this, right? Do you like let's say what machines do you have first of all, right? Do you have an actual stable chest press machine that has a good arm path, right? Does it actually train horizontal adduction or does it have you at this weird angle? Is it comfortable? Is it like is the actual like mechanics of the machine, does it fit your body? Because some people are really short, some people are really tall, and not every machine is designed for like everyone, right? So you have to also ask yourself that as well. And you're kind of a taller person, right? How tall are you?
Yeah, 6'3".
Yeah. I bet you could speak to this. There's probably a lot of machines that you've been like, wow, this is not meant for me.
Yeah, I hit a lift with TNF and there's this glute builder hip thrust machine and it's not even a hip thrust machine. It's because it's like a hip extension machine. You're standing. and
Oh, I know
it's
what you're
like
talking.
this
Yeah,
yeah, it's
yeah,
the standing hip thrust machine, and
yeah.
he hopped on it. He was like, "Have you ever tried this? This is the best machine I've ever done for glutes." And I said, "Actually, yeah, I have, and that's the worst machine. I hate it so much." And it's because my legs are too long to where the pad digs into my quads, so I can't make it go up into pubic bone area
Mhm.
where you want to have when you're thrusting. So for me, I was like, "This is terrible. It's awful." And he was like, "This is the best machine ever." And I think that's one thing that gets lost on a lot of people. One machine might feel amazing for you and terrible for someone else because machines are not built for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So that's what I would firstly consider is like asking yourself, like, because you got to try things first. You have to experiment. But if you have a great chest press machine or a great chest fly, really there's not going to be as big of a difference, right? Like if you have, for example, like a converging chest press and a converging, obviously fly is obviously converging, but if you have a converging chest press and a fly, like realistically, the only difference is you're either going to have minimal elbow extension torque or minimal elbow flexion torque, right? So it's a difference of, do I want the tiniest bit of an isometric on my biceps, or do I want a tiny bit of stimulus to my triceps? So it really comes down to a personal preference at that point because it's still training the same joint action. But again, like let's say the chest press machine, you don't fit it very well, or maybe the settings suck, or maybe the stack's too light, then obviously you have to say, well, I can't really do much with this machine. I'm not going to have a great runway of progress with this machine. So I'm going to do a different one. So I think there's a lot of nuance to that question. But I would say, like, typically speaking, for a beginner, when we're talking about like programming, it kind of goes back to the efficiency argument and asking yourself, how can I train the major joint actions like most efficiently at first? Obviously, as I said, elbow flexion extension, I would kind of exclude just because you're not going to really get your biceps and triceps involved as much in like a row or a press as much as people think. But from there, I would ask, like, let's say you've been training for 6 months, right? And you're really like, I want to bring up my chest as much as possible. Then you can start considering like isolations and asking yourself, how can I do horizontal adduction with minimal elbow extension or elbow flexion torque? And then you can kind of play around with that and choosing machines that allow for that. But I do think there's a lot of individual like anatomy that comes into that question. As much as I wish it would be easy as just to be like, yeah, go do a pec deck because it's the best thing ever and it's an isolation single joint movement. Chest press is multi joint. It's a bit more complicated than that. So usually that's the issue with like social media is if they want like an answer to just be apparent and easy for everyone, but it's not always
Yes.
going to be because for you that machine is the worst. For TNF, it's the best. So if TNF makes a video saying this is the best and everybody goes and does it, some people are going to find out it's not the best. So
Yeah.
that's kinda how it works. So, yeah, it's unfortunate. I wish machines could all be adjustable perfectly, but unfortunately, that would require a lot of engineering that just does not. Well, it costs a lot of money.
Yeah. No, I think that's one thing to keep in mind. If you're on the extremes in terms of height and or weight on the upper end or the lower end, you need to just keep in mind that not every machine is going to be great for you. The gym is designed for the average person who's around that 5'6" to 5'8" area and in a good shape, right? Like
Mhm.
I've trained obese clients and a lot of times there's machines that they just can't fit in. That's another part of where the interindividuality comes in is do you fit in the machine? Does it feel good for you? And if you are on the extremes, one or the other, that's where you just need to be okay with knowing that really the difference between whatever someone says, this is the best machine ever versus this is the worst machine ever. They're both going to grow your muscle as long as you're training the joint action.
Yeah.
It's just like how people will have shit on bench press so much, and there's a million people that have built beautiful, massive chests using just a bench press.
Yeah, and at one point, there was all they had, right? At one point, there were no
Exactly.
machines, right? So, like, they had
Yeah.
to do what they had to do. And, yeah, kinda going back to what you were saying a little bit about the interindividual, like, in the stuff that you don't really think about as an average gym goer, right? Like, you're not thinking about the impact of, like, being obese or being super tall if you're not super tall or obese. But, like, an obese client might have an issue with, like, certain movement patterns compared to you, like, for example, a squat. Let's say somebody's
Yeah.
400 pounds and they are trying to go do a freaking barbell squat or a Smith machine squat or some kind of a squat pattern that requires a lot of core stability, that's not going to happen very well or easily. Being 400 pounds, because you also have to lift yourself up, right? So, like, that's some things that just people don't consider. So, like, there are nuances that are going to get lost. And that's why I think social media is going to highlight like best, worst, instead of just understanding that a lot of this is not as different as people think it is. But, people want to get caught up in theoreticals. And again, I'm very theoretical as well. But in terms of practical application and practical advice, I try to stray away from being ultra theoretical because it just doesn't really help a lot of
Yeah.
people. It actually hurts more people than it helps. And then we have a lot of people going, why doesn't this work? Like, am I doing something wrong, or am I just like, am I type 1 fiber dominant? I've actually had people ask me that. I thought people were like, knew that was a joke. I mean, obviously, yes, some people are going to have like fiber typing differences, but yeah, like, I actually had people genuinely asking me that when like
Me too.
hiring. Yeah. So there are things that really have like hurt the gym community and helped with science-based lifting.
Mm.
But I do think the dogmatic, yeah, this is the best, this is the worst, that has hurt the gym community a lot.
Yeah. If you're enjoying the podcast and want some help actually applying this stuff to your own training and nutrition, check out the link in my bio and apply for personalized one on one fitness coaching. If you're serious about dialing things in, making better progress, and getting more out of the work you're already putting in, I'd love to work with you. All right, back to the episode.
Unfortunately. But
I would even argue that that's not a science-based exclusive thing. I think that's something
oh
that
yeah,
has
oh yeah,
been around since lifting started, is just the
oh yeah.
dog. Like, everyone's saying, "This is the best chest workout." Like, that's been a thing since the old YouTube videos in, like, 2001 of people saying, like, "This is the only way to grow your chest." It's just now they're using PMIDs to justify it instead of their own physique, or they're
Yeah.
using both.
And that's the other problem now. It's like we have it on both sides. We have the gym bros who don't really know what they're doing, telling people this is the best exercise. And sometimes it's really gimmicky and actually is bad, right? Like sometimes, like I don't want to like dog on exercises because like most exercises, if they train the joint action, they're great. But if you have me on a Bosu ball doing a freaking single leg pistol squat, trying to train my stabilizers, I'm not going to say anything. Don't make me do that, please. Like that's stupid,
Yeah.
right?
I saw a Facebook
Oh
post.
God,
I made a
Facebook,
video about it, bro.
boy.
It was a workout to bring up your arms, right? The first exercise is a single leg preacher curl. It's not even a preacher curl. You're literally just standing on one leg, bent over, doing dumbbell curls. And then the second exercise was a dumbbell crucifix curl.
Oh god, that
And
reminds me,
like,
like, I would say it reminds me of the trend on TikTok right now. There's something called, this might get me canceled. It's called the African curl. People thought I was talking about Monday when I was talking about this. They said the Monday curl? I was like, "No, guys. Oh my god." Oh, but no, the African curl essentially is, it's almost like a Zodeman curl. It's where you do, like, a curl up, you pause, go into a hammer curl, come back up, pause, go back into supinated. And they're trying to claim that this is the best bicep exercise of all time. And I don't know why it's called the African curl, but it's called the African curl. There's just like gimmicky exercises obviously have existed forever, right? But now like you said, we have PMIDs now, like people using PMIDs to support the claims. So it's like no matter where you go now, there's people being dogmatic everywhere, right? So
yes.
it's hard to navigate because you're going to see people who are massive that are preaching exercise. You're like, well, they look amazing, but then there's other people over here. It's like, well, the evidence actually says this is better. And if you don't know what you're reading, you're going to be like, oh, I trust this guy because he has a freaking research article behind him. So
Yeah.
it is kind of hard to navigate now, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. But I think the practical takeaway for someone is when you're choosing the best exercise, first choose the muscles, then choose joint actions and what exercises train these joint actions. And when I'm looking at what exercise I'm going to do to train this joint action, the first thing I'm going to look at is obviously, like we are talking about, practicality and comfortability. That's the first thing. Is I don't care how good something is on paper. If it feels bad when you personally get into it, then it's bad.
Yeah.
And the next thing is going to be stability, right? I'm not going to say, okay, yeah, this is your squat pattern. Hop on that Bosu ball. Let's do some pistol squats. So
Yeah.
I want stability. There's a reason why, we don't even need to get into the whole debate of like seatbelting yourself into everything, but there is a reason why dynamometers look like torture devices. And for anyone that doesn't know, a dynamometer is how they test a maximum voluntary contraction, which is just basically how much force does this muscle produce? And they're trying to isolate that one muscle as much as possible. You get strapped in to everything. It looks like a saw trap.
Yeah. It looks like
And
a torture device. That's to
yeah,
say.
yeah. So that is how we test things. And there's a reason for that. So we do want to add stability where it makes sense. And of course, just like anything else, there's diminishing returns. So you don't need to be seatbelted, cuffed, Bluetooth de-handled into everything, but there is merit to increasing stability. The last thing that I'm going to look at is the resistance profile. So I've gotten a lot of questions about this recently. Is what resistance profile that should I choose? And again, for anyone that doesn't know, that's basically just where is this movement the hardest? And if you want to know how to test the resistance profile of your machine, where does it feel the hardest? That's the
Mhm.
most practical takeaway I can give you. I'm not going to try and teach you how biomechanics work and about moment arms. Where does it feel the hardest? And if you can't tell where it feels the hardest, do a set. Where do you fail?
Yeah.
That's going to tell you. And the resistance profile from the evidence that we have doesn't seem to matter that much. It seems like resistance profiles matter more with movements that are using multiple muscle groups or
Yeah,
muscles that have multiple heads.
that was the Jeremy Eppier, like, he was the one who was
Yes.
behind that one? Yeah, I know.
Yeah, with the prime one where they did the pec deck and the yeah. So I would argue that if we want to train things with resistance profiles, it would mostly be with compounds. So
Mhm.
something like an SLDL. And then this is again where we're getting into resistance profiles. Are they going to matter? And what evidence do we have saying that they matter? It's going to be leverages. So now we can get into the neuromechanical matching. And then the other one is the length to tension relationship. So for anyone that doesn't know, length to tension relationship is just where does your muscle produce the most force in its given range of motion. So for my biceps, where at what point of me doing this is there going to be the most force internally? And so there's two schools of thought here, and I'll let Jackson kind of take over. First is neuromechanical matching dead? That's
Mhm.
what we'll ask you about that because if it's dead, then there's no point in me even using it. And next is okay, if it's not dead, when do I use that and when do I use the length to tension relationship if they differ?
Yeah, there's a lot of there's a lot of discourse about this. So the problem is neuromechanical matching itself in like the data has only really been looked at with a few muscles, and it's mostly been intercostal muscles. And then I think the calves, they did look at that one. But the problem with the definition people know versus the definition in the literature is they're not the same. So the definition in the literature, mechanical advantage is not just internal moment arm. So as he said, we're not going to get into biomechanics and going into levers, but just think of it this way. Leverage dictates like where your muscles can be more efficient at producing force. Right. So where can I put this muscle in a position where it has the least challenge to do the joint action that it possibly can? And when we're looking at best leverages, we're looking at overall comparing the leverages of different muscles at different joint actions and asking which one has better relative leverage than the other. And that's how people are using neuromechanical matching to justify a training because they're asking, okay, well, if I have better relative leverage, then the biceps don't have to work as hard to produce the force. So the brain is going to recruit that muscle, a muscle region, a muscle type, or whatever, and it's going to cause that muscle to be recruited over the others. So biceps being an easy one, I want to say 20 degrees of elbow flexion. The biceps have greater relative leverage based off of one paper that we have that only looked at, I think, like 4 or 5 cadavers. But nonetheless,
Yeah.
right, if we go off of that
And
data,
I
yeah,
think this is important when we're talking about neuromechanical matching. Most people will look at a Beardsley graph and they'll see a massive difference on the graph. But this is why it's important to, when you're looking at hypertrophy data, please, 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 for the love of God, look at the units. Because when it might look like a huge difference on the graph. And then when you look at the units, the y axis is millimeters. And so when we're talking about this difference looks massive on the graph, but it's 2 millimeters and it was taken from a cadaver of a 65-year-old woman who had never done any resistance training in her life.
yeah,
Now, I'm going to ask you as the listener, do you think that maybe your elbow flexors, your brachialis, your brachioradialis, and your biceps, do you think you have a little bit different of an elbow flexor composition than Edna from the 70s?
yeah. Also, keep in mind your insertion and origin change things, right? Like where your muscle belly starts, where your tendon, like where your muscle belly tendon thing starts, right? Because like your muscle attaches to a bone by attaching to a tendon, right? So your muscle doesn't just
Yes.
fuse to your bones. So if you have a longer muscle belly, that changes things, right? So there's things that you have to consider individually. Like individuality definitely matters. But the one thing I was gonna just also point out is as much as I do want to give Chris credit in certain things, I will also give him criticism in this. A lot of his data is cherry picked. So that
Yes.
elbow flexor one, was only looking, I think it was only looking at was it women's specimen or the male specimen? I can't remember. But he
It
only
was
looked at,
the graph is only women
yeah, so
because he
it's
didn't
only women's
because the
specimen.
graph for the males looks different.
Yeah, and it's the funny thing is, I don't think the biceps at one point have greater relative leverage than anything with the male. So, like, it just goes to show how different things can be.
Yes.
But nonetheless, the whole idea is if I can find the muscle with the greatest relative leverage in a specific joint angle, then I can make an exercise harder in that, like, that joint angle range, and I can recruit that muscle fiber better. Now, the other school of thought is length tension relationship, like you brought up, where it's asking myself, where does this muscle produce the most force? And then how can I make the exercise harder so that I can force that muscle to produce more force in a range where it already has to? So it's like basically causing a lot of stress to that muscle. So the problem is right now, in terms of outcomes, it does not seem like there is much outcome data in terms of EMG activity versus, I would say there's a little bit of hypertrophy evidence, like outcome data in terms of like growth that can support neuromechanical matching, but most of the EMG data does not. And EMG is flawed. It's not perfectly representing motor unit recruitment. But if we were to look at neuromechanical matching and determine whether we were actually recruiting those muscle fibers, we would need to look at EMG, right? It's the only thing we
Yes.
really have. So a lot of the EMG is conflicting. And the arguments against that is EMG is messy, which I think is kind of a weak argument, right? Because
Yeah.
yes, EMG is messy, but we should see something. We should see some consistency somewhere, and we don't. So I would say I don't think we can say it's dead because again, the actual definition in the literature is different. It does not say but mechanical advantage is not just defined as internal leverage. Mechanical advantage is
Yeah.
defined as mechanical. It's defined as leverage, but then also length tension relationship, also cross sectional area, also fascicle length, and all these other
Yep.
factors that go into it.
Pronation
So
angle.
yeah, pronation angle is another one. Those, I wouldn't say neuromechanical matching in the research is dead. I would say the concept of internal leverages being the only thing that matters is dead. That is a concept that is extremely oversimplified, and I don't think it's representative of what the overall evidence actually shows us. And there's a lot of factors that go into it. So I wouldn't say the leverages don't matter, but I wouldn't over rely on using internal leverages. So it definitely, yeah, it's very nuanced, but
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think that there's merit in using sort of both, just taking principles from both in your training. And this is where you sometimes you do need to lean into mechanisms when you don't have the outcomes. So one thing that I will use, for example, is when I'm programming stiff leg deadlifts, I do anterior posterior and I train adductors on my anterior day. So when I come to posterior day and I do my stiff leg deadlifts, I don't want to smack my adductors up again. And we don't have any data really looking at if I go into a super deep stretch and I go all the way down to the ground with my SLDL or if I stop right below the knee. But we do have the leverage data that shows that the adductor is a much better hip flexor, has much better leverage to perform hip flexion in those super deep ranges than the hamstring. So in that case, I don't go all the way down. I don't go super deep in. So it's more of like a rack pull, like a stiff leg rack pull, because I'm only going just below my knees. And that is where I'm using the leverage data. And then there's other times where, for example, I mean, anytime I think about length to tension relationship and basing your training around that, I think about Jared McMahon and all of the optimal length partials. So he's kind of the pioneer of lengthened partials, but he doesn't do lengthened partials in the way that lengthened partials are defined now, of where
yeah,
you're just staying in the bottom little range of motion. He does optimal length partials, which is based on the length to tension relationship, where he is trying to basically only train the muscle where it produces the most force. So for the quads, for example, he has studies where he basically trains them from like 90 degrees of knee flexion to around 50, because that's right on the plateau of the length to tension relationship. That's where your muscle can create the most force internally. And we have seen from his research that you grow as much, if not maybe a little bit more, from just focusing on that. But again, he's only done those in the quads. He's done like 3 different studies, but they've all been in the quads. And we can't just automatically extrapolate that to every muscle.
yeah,
So I do think it is a good idea to sort of leverage that data. So with the biceps, for example, the biceps have the best relative leverage around that 20-degree if we're looking at the very limited data that we have. But then we also look at their length to tension relationship and we see, okay, they're on the ascending limb, which just means that they don't produce very much force at super long lengths. This is a very nuanced topic, and this is where it gets very confusing because people will see something is on the ascending limb, which means that it produces the most force at those shorter lengths. And I will say, okay, since it's on the ascending limb, we should probably train it at a long length. And that might sound backwards at first. So I really want to explain the thought process behind this. We want to train it at a long length because we're getting closer to the plateau. And the plateau is where we can produce the most force. This is also one of the reasons why people kind of just say you want to train every muscle at long lengths. Because if it's on the ascending limb, if we train it at a longer length, we're training it closer to the plateau. And if it's something that's on the descending limb, which means it does produce force better at long lengths, some muscles have the ability to produce what's called passive tension. So the length to tension curve goes up and then it has the plateau and then it goes down. But if you have passive tension, and it doesn't go down, it kind of can keep going up because you have a third beyond actin and myosin, which are what are inside your muscles actually pulling. So a third one called titin, and that also adds some force. So based on this, it seems like there might be some merit to just training everything at long lengths. And this is where things really get muddy and really mechanistic. There's dudes that have gotten jacked off of just doing dumbbell curls their entire life, and there's no tension in the lengthened position there. My God, I had a guy arguing with me in the comments about because I said, if you want to make your preacher curl more descending, you can lean back and you can move your elbow behind the pivot. And he was like, oh, but you could also just do an incline curl. And I was like, no, because there's no tension in the lengthened position because gravity is the force you're resisting. If gravity is the force you're resisting, you cannot have tension in the bottom portion because
Yeah.
gravity is always pushing you down and you're just holding the dumbbell. So you can get it to be more descending than something else based on where you're becoming parallel with the ground, but you will never have tension in that bottom position. I can hold a dumbbell for 16 years and my side delt will never feel it.
Yeah. I also would one thing I did want to add is I think with neuromechanical matching and like length tension relationship, you kind of also touched on it a little bit, but I want to highlight this. A lot of things overlap, right? So
Yes.
like this is why like a lot of people say neuromechanical matching using leverages as correlation, not causation, is because you brought up, I think, what was it? Actually, I'll bring up another example. I think this is an even better one. So when we look at like the lats, right? A lot of people say, well, we want to train the lats. We don't want to go above 120 degrees
Yeah.
of shoulder elevation because lats lose leverage. But here's another thing to consider. The lats may lose leverage, yes. But what also tends to have a better ability to produce force in terms of length tension relationship is the lower pec. So here, the lower pec actually is at its like lengthened position, right? So it's not ultra lengthened, it has great ability to produce force and pull down through this like shoulder extension range. So this lower pec and tricep are going to be able to do this action potentially better. And we see EMG data correlate with this. Funny enough, we looked at the dumbbell pullover and we saw higher activity in the pecs and a lot less in the lats. So you also have to ask yourself that question. Am I actually getting the results I'm getting because of leverages, or am I getting it because of length tension relationship? And I do think you can follow like neuromechanical matching and still see amazing results despite it potentially not even being the reason, right? Like it could
Yeah.
just be length tension relationship. But I think there are a lot of cases where you can potentially get away with using neuromechanical matching, despite, like I said, it being the cause or not. But I would say, like you said, I think training a muscle at a typically a longer length is going to be more ideal. There's not many muscles I can think of where I would be like, yeah, I don't want to train that at a long length. It's not going to give me any extra gains. Because like realistically, everything is going to produce force at a longer length. And we already brought up the length tension relationship, passive forces and stuff like that. But like certain muscles can lengthen longer. So like let's say the biceps lengthen here, that's their end range, right? Like that's as long as they can go. Some muscles can keep going, right? And they keep going. So it's not that ascending limb means we train it at shortened ranges and do shortened partials. It just
Yeah.
means that the muscle or the sarcomeres only can lengthen to a certain extent, and then that's the farthest they go. Other like muscles can keep going, and then as you brought up, Titan, Dr. McMahon, I think he said it is Titan, so I'm going to call it Titan.
Titan
But
sounds cooler.
yeah, it does sound cooler. Titan sounds kind of weird. But there's also the extracellular matrix that also is tugging. And
Yes,
essentially, what they're trying to do is if your muscle keeps going out this way, they're trying to pull it back, right? They're like, please stop going that far. We don't want you to just split in half. So, like, there's a lot of nuance to that as well. But generally speaking, everything is going to go to the plateau, right? The plateau is a typical normal long length. So, like, quads, 90 degrees is plateau, like you brought up. You could go farther into knee flexion and get passive tension benefits, but you don't have to grow the quads. So, like, it is probably a safer bet to just go to a long length. You don't have to go to the longest length. You don't have to stretch, but just go to a long length. And I think most people are going to be fine.
I agree. Not getting into the super long length cult of the everything needs to be lengthened partials. Obviously, we have the lengthened partial meta analysis that found that, and that's another thing is anytime that we're comparing this, one thing I would really just want the listeners to take away from is we have never found any difference that has been so drastic to where the entire industry has changed their training based off of it. Every time it's like our confidence interval is barely not crossing zero.
Yeah.
So you really can grow from doing a lot of different things. Again, getting back to what we started, hypertrophy is stupidly forgiving. And the last thing that I will note about exercise selection is longevity.
Mm,
So specifically with the quads, I mess around with optimal length partials for a little bit. And I will tell you that you can use a lot more weight when you're doing an optimal length partial because you're cutting off the range of motion. But that's a lot of shear and a lot of force on your patella tendon. And I don't know about you, but I have problems with loading leg extension machines doing full range of motion with pauses. So
mm.
if you have just the best leg extension that you can load into oblivion and it feels amazing, sure, maybe play around with some optimal leg partials. But the person who trains optimally for 2 years and then gets hurt and then can't train at all for 6 months is going to make less gains than the guy who trains suboptimally, but he trains smart and he doesn't get hurt and he can train for 5 years.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why I do full range of motion on the quads, knowing that I might be able to get just a tiny bit more gains if I did just an optimal length partial. Because I know that one is my joint, I can work it through the entire range of motion, which is not only good for it in the sense that I'm using less weight, so there's less shear now, but also in the fact of I am a human who does things outside of the gym.
Yep.
And it's good to have joints that are mobile in a large range of motion. And we know that stretching doesn't really do much for building range of motion. Stretching doesn't really do much in general. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but if you really look into the data on it, you're not going to find much other than acutely. So,
Yeah.
like short term, yeah, it'll increase your range of motion. But really, the best way to increase the range of motion is just weight training. It's just train in the range of motion that you want to be strong in, and you'll get there.
And I would
And
say comfortable, like you brought up. I
yeah,
think you need to be careful because sometimes like ranges of motion are going to be like dependent on you. And you like, yes, like it might be more ideal to be in a specific plane of motion, specific range of motion, but if it causes pain, why are you doing it? Right. You're gonna
yeah,
hurt yourself. Like for right now, like I have to be careful with the frontal plane with shoulder pressing. I'm slowly adding it back in. But for a while, I couldn't stay in the frontal plane with my right shoulder because I have bursitis in my scapula. So essentially, the bursa it's supposed to like kind of help the joint kind of move smoothly. It
yeah.
essentially burst. So I'm not having that lubricant, like natural lubricant with my scapula. So it's causing some discomfort. So I have to kind of do more of the scapular plane, which yes, my upper pec's going to come in, but so be it, right? I have to be able to train around it. But yeah, I also
Holy
would say with the
fatigue,
length and
bro. Your
yeah,
chest
I
is
know.
cooked.
I
You're
know.
bro, you are gonna make no chest gains because
I
you're not in the
know.
full frontal plane.
It's not like my chest is even I was like, not like my chest is a like a overly developed muscle group anyways, but I was say like I think yeah, the other thing I was gonna say is with the length and partials that you brought up, also like standardizing that
Yeah,
is so, like, hard for a lot of people. You're gonna end up doing length and partials past failure, and then
yeah,
you're just gonna add unnecessary muscle damage, and then you brought up knee pain. That's probably why. When you're stressing those joints over and over, and then your muscles can kind of actually recover a lot faster than people think, but your tendons don't. Your
no,
tendons and your cartilage, that heals super stupid slow. So you do
yeah,
need to be careful. Like, that's why I think full range of motion is more, like, arbitrarily, I don't want to say full range of motion, but like long length to short length, right? So not like super deep
Yes.
stretch, but long length to short length is more ideal probably for most people than like length and partial.
Yes, I will 100% agree with that because one thing that I think is very important as well is standardization of your form. So we have one paper essentially that compared cheat reps to super strict form. And this is probably stricter form than you will ever do in your life because these people were in a lab with multiple researchers staring at them, recording their sets, telling them what to do. This is probably the strictest form of tricep extensions and bicep curls that you've ever seen. So even if you are trying to be super strict, you're probably not going to get as strict as they did, comparing to people who were literally encouraged to use momentum. And we saw no difference in strength gains, no difference in hypertrophy. And you can interpret these findings in one of two ways. You can either look at it and say, fuck yeah, I can cheat rep and I can make just as much progress as the guy who's doing perfect reps. Or you can look at it and say, that's great. I can use robotic form and make just as much progress as the guy who's cheating. And I
Yeah.
prefer the latter because that way I can standardize everything. If you're using momentum, yeah, the data looks like you're going to grow just as much. But how do I know how much momentum I was using from session to session? How do I track that?
Yeah.
Like,
And
obviously,
I
I
would
could
also
record my set.
I would say I also would also even give a third point is like, well, it also just goes to show intensity is the driver of growth. So you do it robotic,
Yes.
you do it cheating, you're still going to grow. So I would also just remind people like you don't want to obviously cheat rep for literally just your ego. You also don't want to make yourself into a robot that doesn't have any intensity. Right. Like that's the other thing I say it's like you have to look at it from like, okay, intensity grows. But if I want to track progress, I need to be as consistent with my form as possible. Obviously, it doesn't need to be 100%, but it does need to be close enough where, like, if I get that cheat rep, let's say my last rep kind of looks like maybe I'm doing a pull down where my scapula normally looks like this, and then all of a sudden last rep's like this. Do I really count that rep where it's like I did this shrugging motion that led to my arm looking like it was going down, but it really was just my scapula, right? Does this
Yeah.
count? No, it doesn't count because you didn't actually get the rep. You do need to like cheat rep, it's fine, but just don't actually count those as progression, right? Count progression
Yes.
as progression. So I definitely agree. I think most people should not be cheat repping, ego lifting. You're just going to end up hurting yourself eventually.
Yeah.
So as well, I don't want to say you're eventually. It's there's a higher likelihood because you're not controlling for variables, but
I mean,
muscle injury is very complex.
I would double down. I'll say you will hurt yourself eventually.
A while ago, I looked at muscle injury and looked at predictive models, and they looked at a bunch of different ways to like predict it. Usually, the ones where it was like a linear, will if you do this, your muscle like you will get yourself hurt. And they looked at these different types of models. One of them was kind of the way like where you're like you will hurt yourself. That model had about an 8% predictability compared to the more complex models where they were looking at like nonlinear equations and other oh god, what is it called? I hate statistics. I always forget the freaking terminology. Point is, the more nuanced ones were like 60% more accurate. So I always just say like, typically speaking, the body is forgiving in a sense, but don't test it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't go out of your way to test it, right? And test
Yeah.
your luck. So I agree. Sometimes ego lifts are probably going to hurt yourself if you're stupid.
Yeah.
So
I mean, the only reason I say you are is because you're going to hurt yourself no matter what you do.
oh yeah,
And
oh yeah.
like at some point during your lifting career, you can do everything right. You can have perfectly robotic form and you're going to get hurt. Bodies are not perfect and we're putting them under a lot of stress. And
Minor or severe, like you
yeah.
will get hurt. Like I'm lucky I haven't torn anything, but I have
Yeah.
hurt things. My freaking shoulder, the bursitis. Like I've had that. I've had knee issues. You said you had knee issues.
Yeah.
So how long have you been training? Because I've been training for almost I think 6 years at this point. So
I'm at I'm at 5 years.
5 years? Okay, so
Yeah.
I've had shoulder injury here, knee problem on the right side, knee problem on the left side. I had an issue with the back of my knee as well. I didn't tear anything, but I've had a bunch of minor issues, and they have
Huh.
like they do occur, and they do kind of. I don't want to say they fully like 100% go away. Sometimes they reoccur. So like. But I would say the knee issues haven't been as big of an issue. But most things, like you will, no matter what you do, you will get hurt.
Yeah.
Hopefully not severely, but you
No.
will get hurt.
That's why I purposely try to program in a way that my clients don't get hurt. And if they do, it's not as bad. One last thing I want to touch on with exercise selection is the debate of where do I put my compounds? And specifically, I think with upper body, people don't really, it's not really a debate. It's more so of just like, what do you want to prioritize? Do you want to prioritize your chest or your biceps? It's more of a hot topic of where do I put my hinge? Where do I put my squat? And for me, again, talking about shear on the knee joint, I like to put them second. My reasoning for the quads is Well, first of all, do you need both? Yes, flat out, yes. I'm willing to just be dogmatic on that approach and say that you do need both. We have differences in regional hypertrophy. It's shown up like 4 or 5 times every time that they do a comparison.
You're talking
And
about
then
squats
also
and leg extension, right?
yeah,
Okay, got it. Okay,
and
just wanna make sure.
yeah, and it's mostly in the vastus lateralis. That's the other thing that tells me that I can stand on this 10 toes is that it's the same head of the quad that sees this regional hypertrophy difference. And then also, I know that none of you listening, if you're dudes, none of you, you're all skipping your hip thrusts. I know you're all skipping your hip thrusts. So do your goddamn squat because that's all your glutes are getting. You're neglecting them. And if you do want to hop on stage, I have a couple people that I'm working with right now, and glutes are a weak point for all of them because none of them have ever done hip thrusts in their life.
Yeah.
They only get it from their squats and from their hinges. So I will say, yes, you need a squat. Yes, you need a hinge. For the hinge, we actually have a new paper that came out. It's a preprint, and we have different activation between the hinges and between the hamstring curl, but even just mechanistically, we know that not all of them cross the hip. So like
Yeah.
we know there's going to be differences. And then again, with just overall leg building, trains the glutes and the adductors as well. But in terms of that, yes, you do need both. In my opinion, I'll stand on that. In terms of where you're going to put them, I always put them after. So the rationale behind that is with the leg extension, we're going to be training the entire quad. We're going to be training the rec fem as well, which doesn't really get trained in squat patterns. You can argue that it's isometrically active, whatever. It's not getting trained very well.
Yeah.
But then we're also fatiguing the quads. So that's going to allow you to do a squat pattern with less weight, which is going to, one, I don't like lugging plates around. I'm lazy. And two, that's less shear, that's less torque on your joints in general at that point. And then we can also get into like central nervous system fatigue of how these doing these big compound movements is definitely going to affect your movements later on in the session. And if you don't think so, I would just challenge you to experiment with it yourself. You
Yeah.
know, maybe it doesn't for you, but maybe you also just don't squat very much.
Yeah, I would also say so there's like 2 schools of thought because I tend to agree for hypertrophy. It typically is probably better to put your single joint stuff before your compounds, but there is a little bit of nuance because like I will say like you brought up one thing, like your loadability is not going to be as high, so that points towards one thing. Your strength on compounds will be higher and better if you do put them first. It's like everything
Yes.
else. You put a movement first, it's gonna be stronger. You are
Yes.
going to get stronger at that movement potentially. I don't want to say it's necessarily going to be significant, but you are going to get stronger at that movement faster if it's put first and you're fresher. The other thing is the cardiovascular demand, right? If you're not
Yes.
very cardiovascular and you're not very good at like handling that like stress, which if you're not doing cardio, which most of you aren't, and like I'm not even just talking about just steps. You have to be doing cardio. You have to be
Yeah.
actually getting your heart rate above, like I want to say above 60%. If you're not doing that, you're not going to have the
Yeah.
endurance to handle that stress. Your fiber typing is also not probably for most people. If you're not really training for any sort of endurance, your muscle fibers are probably not as well protected against metabolic stress as well. So you have cardiovascular demands that are issue. Then you have not as well adapted type 2 fibers because if you're training with just heavier loads all the time, like there are adaptations that occur, but there's also unique adaptations with like endurance that you're just not going to ever get because we're training for hypertrophy right now. So there are issues, right, that are going to come about if you're training a compound first. But I do think strength, you're probably going to put that first. You'll get stronger. Hypertrophy, though, I would put them second. Also, it kind of does warm up the knee a little bit too. Like if you're
Yes.
getting like kind of blood into that area from the hamstring or the quad, I'll do sometimes seated leg curls before I do a squat pattern.
Yes.
Yeah, like that makes it feel so much better.
This is where I do think anecdotes have a place. Anecdotes are not something you should base your entire training philosophy on, but some people's anecdotes matter more than others. So,
Well,
for
it's almost like a
example,
warm up though. Like I
yeah,
think it's a literal. I don't even think it is an anecdote because you could argue that it actually increases the muscle temperature. So it
yeah,
physically warms up your quad, physically warms up the hamstring. So like your co-activation when you're like having your quads contract, your hamstrings are obviously stabilizing. So like not only is your quad warm, your hamstrings warm, everything's warm. So when you're going into
yeah,
your squat pattern, you are actually warmer. That is one thing I didn't even bring up. That is 100% maybe a better reason to potentially suggest greater hypertrophy potential for your
yeah,
squat patterns or your hinges. But yeah, either way,
yeah.
that was the thing I wanted to say. Yeah.
And even with like post activation, like we can get into post activation potentiation because and we have some papers that show that it can last up to 10 minutes. We haven't tested longer than 10 minutes, so it could be even potentially longer. They didn't really know which fibers were experiencing it.
Okay.
They just know that the group that did the heavy ass warm up came back 10 minutes later and was able to squat more. Going back to the anecdotes, I will say you have to use something when the data is lacking and when the mechanisms are lacking. And when I say that some people's anecdotes hold more weight than others, the first person that comes to mind who's somewhat anecdote heavy is hypertrophy coach Joe Bennett.
Mm.
He he is extremely smart. He uses a lot of the research, but he has also trained over 1,000 people and he's been training for over 20 years. So the things that he's seen and the experience that he has weight. I don't
Yeah.
care what you say, specifically about coaches, because they have essentially ran these experiments. No, they're not the most controlled,
Yeah.
but when you've done things with over 1,000 clients and you see things that just tend to work over time, and a lot of times anecdotes get proven by science. Like the 1 gram per pound, that was just an old bodybuilding thing that ended up, the science was like, yeah, it's actually pretty close. And just the whole training to failure. Yeah, old school bodybuilders, a lot of their philosophies. I mean, and you can even get into like the Jake Doshel of like the old school bodybuilders in like the
Bronze, yeah, the
silver
bronze
era.
era
Yeah.
or silver era. Yeah, like the
Yeah.
silver era. That's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, they were doing things that end up getting backed by the research. So anecdotes do hold some weight, especially when they've been repeated multiple times. I'm gonna get called an outcome cell now. And
No, I mean, anecdotes do actually exist on the hierarchy of evidence. It's just they kind of belong on the bottom with like mechanistic like reasoning, right? Because a lot of these
yeah,
things we have ideas. Mechanisms are ideas, and then outcomes prove those ideas in theory. Or not in theory, they prove it in practice, where it's like, okay, the idea is neuromechanical matching is how like our brain essentially recruits muscle fibers or muscle regions to do certain tasks, but then the outcomes have to show it, right? Because we can have an idea, we can see some potential for it occurring with mechanistic data, but that doesn't mean it reflects what happens in the human body. Like we can look at a mouse, we could look at like a mechanism in a mouse, and maybe the mouse has certain like animals will have similar organs to humans, and then we look at what happens to those organs. And I can't remember what it is for the mouse. It might be digestion. Oh no, heart. Because my girlfriend's in a heart lab at one point. They were looking at these mice and they were studying arrhythmias. So we can look at a mechanism for arrhythmia, and we can potentially talk about a pathway that we could target for a drug, but then we have to test that drug in like human cells. And sometimes it
yeah,
doesn't work. Or sometimes we test it in human cells and great, we got some data there. We go actually test it on people and it doesn't work. So it's like there's
yes,
all kinds of layers to that. But I think anecdotes 100% have their place. I mean, I'm a coach. I literally also have my own anecdotes and things that
yeah,
I believe that are not proven. But yeah, they definitely have their place. The only problem I have is when people take anecdotes over what the evidence actually says. And then
yes,
it's like, come on, like most of the evidence says this, you're like arguing with just nothing.
yes.
That's the only thing. But no, I agree.
No, I think anecdotes should only be used when the research and when the mechanisms are lacking.
Yeah, for sure.
So to finish things off, I do a recurring segment called Anabolic Analysis. I've got 3 questions for
Okay.
you.
All right.
First is, what is something that you have changed your mind about?
There's so many things. Neuromechanical matching. That was one that I actually was on. Yeah. No, I was looking at a lot of the outcome data and it was reflecting what a lot of people were saying. But take a step back, you look at the EMG data, you look at some of the other explanations, and it's pretty clear that neuromechanical matching already the definition in the science-based lifting world the social media world, is just not reflective of what it even was in the research that it was being studied in. So it's like already there's a contradiction there, and then the data doesn't fully line up and there's more data lining up with other theories. So it's like, okay, I'm probably more inclined to say internal leverages are not actually um, the end all be all. And also, it just doesn't make sense that one factor would make the difference of everything. But I'm trying to think other things off the top of my head. Like neuromechanical matching is the first one that pops to my head. I would say maybe the protein intake one. I think at one point I was kind of pushing like 7.3 maximizes growth, but like some of the data just shows that like 0.73 is enough generally to maximize, but there do seem to still be some small benefits, albeit maybe not statistically significant upwards. And also, I will say with dieting, like composition tends to be better when protein intake is a little higher.
Yeah,
So higher, like closer to like 1 gram to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight. So I think it's a little bit more nuanced than just saying 0.73 maximizes growth. So that's one thing I changed my mind on.
I will add in that we basically have no data showing that a higher protein intake is bad. And my school of thought is if something is either a net neutral or a net positive, why not just do it?
Yeah.
Like, because really bumping your protein is only a bad thing if it starts significantly taking away from your other macronutrients.
I also will say I did change my mind on like bulking being necessary for growth, not maximizing growth. I'm not even going to get into that topic. I will say at least I did change my mind about growth needing to a surplus being needed to like grow generally. Just saying that because like, the only thing I will say about this that I think people continue to like not understand, the evidence is not showing that a surplus is needed to maximize growth, but it's also not showing that it isn't. It's there is no data that shows a surplus is needed, but that doesn't mean that main gaining is proven to be better. It's just there is no data and that we have
Yeah.
mechanisms to work with. So and that's the only thing I'll say about that. But yeah, I don't think you can build muscle on a deficit. Like that's the point that I think a lot of people still aren't getting. But that's something I didn't believe for a while, and I think a lot of that came down to like emotional bias of me liking food. So
Yeah, honestly, that's I think that's probably, like, why this debate is so heavy is bodybuilders and just people in general don't wanna give up their bulks.
oh
Because
yeah,
I am, like, a key example of this. I came out of high school literally getting called Slenderman on the daily. 6'3", 160. 8 months later, I was 230 pounds. The worst part is it didn't even feel good eating 4,000 calories.
oh my god.
Especially because when I did it, I didn't even get the pleasure of dirty bulking. I was just eating, like, chicken, rice, ground beef, and, like, egg whites to get to that weight. I
Yep.
could've just been eating pizza and probably been doing just as good.
Yeah, I was a fat kid, unfortunately, growing up. So I had the opposite. I got really, 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 really lean, and then somebody told me, "Yeah, if you want to build muscle, you got to bulk." I was like, "Oh shit!" So I started bulking. I got up to 220 pounds. I went from 260 down to 160, back up to 220.
Yeah,
And fun time. Basically, gave myself an eating disorder from that. So that was real fun. But no, I definitely don't think you need to worry about building muscle if you're overweight. You can definitely build muscle on a deficit. And I think
yeah,
for some reason, people say it's only possible in beginners, and that's only because muscle growth is just slow. So when you're looking at advanced lifters, it's a slow process in the first place. So
yeah.
it's going to slow down a little bit. But I think
But
those are the big ones.
we did just see it happen with the recomp study, in
Oh,
trained
yeah.
lifters.
Yeah.
Recomp
Exactly.
and
You
trained
can.
lifters in a
Yeah.
deficit. So they grew more than the people at maintenance. So what is your hottest take?
Hottest take. Shit. My hottest take is that as of right now, and it kind of, I honestly, I don't know if I feel like it's just going to steal Monday's take, is that most people are not as serious about the gym as they think they are. And I hate to say this, statistically speaking, most of the people training right now religiously are not going to be in the gym in 5 years. Like that is the sad statistic. I want you guys to be in the gym in 5 years. But right now, a lot of people are putting their life and soul into the gym
Yeah.
and have nothing else going on for them, and they're gonna hit a wall where they burn out. And that's the
Yes.
problem. If you hit that wall and you got nothing else to do, your life is gonna be miserable and you're gonna stop loving the gym. You're gonna get out of the gym and have nothing going for you. So I think
Yeah.
balance. Find some balance. If unless you're a bodybuilder, if you have actual competition, you have great structure, you're going for it. Don't listen to me. But if you
Yeah.
are like a random person just starting into the gym and you're wanting to get big, ask yourself this: what else do I want from life? Why do I want to get big? Am I just
Yeah.
getting big for my vanity? Because I think like I had to have that moment for myself. It's like I'm doing upper lower 6 times a week, but it's at a cost of everything around me, right? So I need to figure something that's better for me. So full body is better for me, even though I would prefer to do upper lower. So
Ah,
that yeah, I know. That's
dude,
my
the full body propaganda is getting to me
see,
just
that's
because
the
I
thing.
am in the gym a lot.
I was considering full body like months ago, but like I just continued to have in my head where it's like, I don't want to change my schedule. I like my schedule. I didn't want to ruin that.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's like you also have to ask yourself, like, what is good for my life? Like, yes, sometimes like sometimes what you want is not what you actually need to do. So like that's kind of what I had to have that
Yeah.
moment for. But when I get a little bit more free time with my schedule, I just have a lot of things going on. When I get a little bit more free time, I'll probably go back to upper low. As much as I know people were joking, like, "Oh my god, he finally went to full body." I've done this before. I went to full body for like 8, maybe 9 weeks, and then I was like, "I hate this. I'm going to upper low
Yeah.
again." So it's just a schedule thing. So have flexibility in your life to be able to schedule things and find things outside of the gym that you find enjoyment in. And it doesn't have to be monetary, right? You don't need to have every
Yeah.
hobby be a monetary thing. Like some people want to make the gym their life and do coaching. Like that's great. Like I do that. You do that. But like we also need hobbies that does not just for this pursuit of money because that's miserable. Like constantly
Yeah.
having to do that. So that's my hot take. I don't even know if it's really a hot take. Yeah. So
I mean, honestly, it kind of is, and it's kind of a sad one that it is hot at this point. The last one is, what advice would you give someone who's trying to build their best physique over the next 5 years?
I think a lot of it would come down to like figuring out what you actually like want first, right? Like actually assessing what you are trying to do because a lot of people go to the gym, they just want to get massive, but they don't even think about what that is. They're just like, I want to get big. What do you want to get big? Right? Like going back to like the individual stuff, ask yourself, what muscles do I actually want to bring up? And then build your split in a way that actually is enjoyable, that makes you consistent. Because when you first go to the gym, it hurts. It doesn't feel very good. You don't want to do it. You're like, oh, I'm sore. Ow, this hurts. Some people like that just puts them off. For me, I like that. I like that sore feeling. I never had that problem, but some people do.
Yeah.
So, like, find things that are actually going to be enjoyable for you. Pick a schedule that's actually going to make you consistent. So, even if that's only going to the gym 2 to 3 times a week doing full body, that is better than the average person, right? Even if it's only one set per muscle, as long as you're going to failure, going close to failure, 2 reps within like within failure, like that is going to lead to better growth than you just not going to the gym.
Mhm.
So I think it's a big thing of just being flexible enough to like understand the concept we've already talked about in this whole entire podcast, but then just applying that and making it sustainable and fun for you. And then if you can do that long term, I mean, you're going to be better off than pretty much 99% of people in the world because most people, as I said, are not going to be in the gym within 5 years. So if
Yeah.
you can do it, if you can stay within 5 years, you're already a minority, which is kind of sad.
Yeah.
The biggest thing I'm experimenting with right now is how many exercises I'm really going to be able to get away with the same level of intensity because I have all this data of me doing upper lower to compare it to, right? Like
Mhm.
I've tracked everything. I have an app that I use for my clients and myself where I track my training. I can see my training progress, the load, the weight and all that stuff, the reps in reserve. So I can compare my progress and compare the load that I'm able to use and see if I can actually get away with this program. Because right now I'm just like, screw it. I'm going to take my upper, I'm going to take my lower, I'm just going to put them together. I'm
Yep.
not going to try to lower anything. I'm just going to have the same exercises. I'm going to reduce the volume to make it a little bit more sustainable. So one set usually per everything, except for I
Mhm.
think like biceps, I do 2 sets. Point is, I'm trying to make it sustain. Like I'm trying to see how much I can do if it's sustainable and if the progress is similar, because I can compare that to my old progress. And I mean, I was dieting too, doing upper lower
Yeah.
6 times a week. So I'm not really dieting that hard right now. So comparatively, my progress should be better with full
So
body because I have more
what are you
reps. Yeah. Okay. So it's 11 plus 7. So it's 18 exercises. And then it's, I want to say 20, maybe 21 sets. Yeah, it's not bad at all. Exactly. I don't think I'm going to have any problems, but like if I want to do a little bit more, like maybe I want to add some extra exercises. I want to see if I can. I just don't know how much I can get away with because I haven't done full body in forever. And I'm also not dieting, so I just have never really done it. So I'm like, what can I get away
Yeah.
with? I'm not going Keenan route. I'm not going 100 exercises. Sorry, Keenan.
Yeah.
I'm not doing that. But yeah, I'm just curious to see what can I
Yeah.
sustain.
And the last question, where can people find more of your work?
I am on Instagram. I'm on TikTok. I'm on YouTube as well. Very inconsistent with YouTube, but even though I post on those platforms, I do try to do my best to engage there. But I really am I'm a lot busier with my clients at this point. So as much as I like trying to engage with comments all the time, I'm not as active as I'd like to be. I do try to answer DMs still, but I opened up a free community very recently within Discord, so I am more active there if you're trying to like message me. But yeah, mostly I'm on pretty much every platform you can think of except for trying to think what are the other platforms.
Oh,
I technically I am on Facebook because I like have Instagram connected. Yeah, those are the main platforms. Mostly TikTok, Instagram though, not YouTube very often, unfortunately.
cool, cool. Well, that is everything that we have planned for today. Thank y'all for listening. If you liked what you heard, make sure to leave a 5-star rating and tune in next week for the new episode. Peace.